Dr. Rachel Hayes drove down the long, gravel path, the tires crunching over fallen leaves that carpeted the way to a place she had long since abandoned. The old family home stood silhouetted against a bruised twilight sky, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the encroaching woods. It had been years, but the news had come like a phantom in the night. Her mother was dead. The official report was vague, citing an accident, but Rachel knew better. The house held secrets, and it had finally claimed the last of its keepers. Stepping across the threshold was like stepping back in time. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight piercing through grimy panes, and the air was thick with the scent of decay and forgotten memories. In her mother's bedroom, tucked away beneath a loose floorboard, she found it a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. Her mother's spidery script filled the pages, detailing a history far darker than Rachel could have ever imagined. It spoke of an ancient blood ritual, a pact made by their ancestors to secure their fortune. The journal described a terrible price. With every generation, a soul had to be offered as a sacrifice. It was an atonement, a penance for a foundational sin lost to time, a debt that could only be paid in blood. The words chilled Rachel to the bone, a grotesque fairy tale that felt all too real within the suffocating confines of the house. The house did not wait long to reveal its true nature. The first night, a sharp, rhythmic knocking echoed from the front door just after midnight. When Rachel peered through the peephole, there was nothing but the swaying trees and the oppressive darkness. She dismissed it as the wind, a trick of an old, settling house. But the knocking returned the next night, more insistent, more desperate. Then came the stains. A deep crimson blemish appeared on the floral wallpaper of the hallway, like a leaking wound in the very heart of the home. She tried to scrub it away, but it only seemed to darken and spread, branching out in vascular patterns across the plaster. Sleep offered no respite. Her dreams were haunted by visions, fragmented and terrifying. A young girl, no older than 7, would stand at the foot of her bed. Her face was pale and featureless, save for the 2 streams of blood that wept from her empty eye sockets. The child never spoke, but her silent, accusatory gaze followed Rachel everywhere. The house itself seemed to be conspiring against her, its groans and creaks sounding like whispers in an unknown language. Photographs on the mantelpiece would be rearranged, their subjects' smiling faces turned to the wall as if in shame. Rachel, a woman of science and logic, found her sanity fraying at the edges. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every floorboard creak sounded like a footstep. She was no longer just visiting a place of grief. She was trapped in a living nightmare, a mausoleum that was actively trying to consume her. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Rachel plunged deeper into her family's hidden history. She spent her days poring over old letters, forgotten photographs, and her mother's increasingly frantic journal entries. The pieces began to click into place, forming a mosaic of horror that centered on a past she had subconsciously suppressed. There were gaps in her own memory, hazy, indistinct periods from her childhood that she had always attributed to the simple passage of time. The journal, however, filled in those blanks with horrifying clarity. Her family hadn't just known about the ritual. They had performed it. The visions of the child were not random apparitions. They were memories, clawing their way out from the deep recesses of her mind. She remembered a sunny afternoon, a game of hide-and-seek near the old, disused well in the backyard. She remembered a playful push, a moment of childish carelessness. She remembered her younger sister, Lily, her name a forgotten whisper, tumbling backward. She remembered the sickening thud and the sudden, awful silence. The family, desperate to protect their surviving daughter and conceal the accident, had turned to the profane rites described in the journal. They had invoked the ancient pact, not to atone for ancestral sins, but to cover up a fresh one. They had offered another soul, a substitute, in an attempt to cheat the curse and erase the tragedy. But the blood debt was not so easily settled. Lily's death was the sin that had reawakened the dormant evil, and the ritual had only delayed the inevitable. The truth was a crushing weight. Rachel wasn't just a mourner returning home. She was the cause of the curse, the unwitting killer whose sin had doomed them all. The final night descended with a palpable sense of doom. A storm raged outside, the wind howling like a tormented spirit, and the rain lashing against the windows in violent torrents. The house, now fully alive, groaned and shuddered around Rachel as if in its death throes. The knocking at the door began again, but this time it was not a polite rap. It was a frantic, splintering pound, the sound of something desperate to get in. The power cut out, plunging the rooms into absolute blackness. In the flashes of lightning, Rachel saw her. Lily stood in the hallway, no longer a distant vision but a corporeal presence. Her form was solid, her dress soaked and tattered, and the blood from her eyes flowed freely, pooling on the floorboards. The air grew impossibly cold as she glided closer, her small hand outstretched. The debt, the journal had warned, was unpaid. The substitute sacrifice had been rejected. Lily had returned to collect what was owed, to claim the soul that should have been hers. An unseen force seized Rachel, lifting her from her feet. The whispers that had plagued her for days now coalesced into a single, deafening chant, an ancient invocation that vibrated through the very foundations of the house. She was dragged through the halls, the walls themselves seeming to warp and twist around her as she was pulled toward the home's as dark heart. Her screams were swallowed by the storm and the malevolent chorus of the ritual. The ancient evil, awakened by a child's death and fed by a desperate pact, was finally consuming its long overdue payment. By morning, the storm had passed. The old house stood silent and still under the pale light of dawn. Inside, there was no sign of Dr. Rachel Hayes. She had vanished completely, erased from existence. The only trace of the night's horror was a single chilling message, freshly written in drying blood upon the hallway wall, a final testament to the curse's grim finality. The blood must be repaid.